How would you grade Hawaii's legislative session this year? Lawmakers were poised to increase the state's minimum wage, infuse a record amount of funding for homes for Native Hawaiians, and change the way Mauna Kea is managed. We take a look back at what passed and what didn't. Join us as we review the 2022 legislative session. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha, and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. State lawmakers took their final votes on hundreds of bills last Thursday, bills regarding funding for Hawaiian homes, raising the state minimum wage to $18 an hour over the next 6 years, overhauling the management of Mauna Kea, increasing teacher pay, and bail reform all passed. What other bills passed this session? What bills didn't? Our panel will review the 2022 legislative session. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email us or call us with your questions. We also encourage you to get involved with the conversation on our Facebook page. Now to our guests. Representative Della Belatti serves District 24, which includes Makiki, Tantalus, Papakolea, Macaulay, Pava'a, and Manoa. She's currently the House Majority Leader. She received her undergrad degree from Princeton University and completed law school at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Blaise Lovell is a reporter for Honolulu Civil Beat. He covers state government, the legislature, and the courts. Born and raised on Oahu, he graduated from Pearl City High before studying journalism at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Representative Gene Ward serves District 17, which is comprised of Hawaii Kai and Kalama Valley. He is the minority policy leader. He's a Vietnam veteran who served as a translator and interpreter. He received a PhD in business sociology from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And joining us via Zoom is Senator Gilbert Keith-Agaran. He represents the 5th Senatorial District that includes Wailuku, Waiheʻe, and Kahului on the island of Maui. He grew up on Maui and graduated from Yale and the University of California at Berkeley Bolt Hall School of Law. Let me start with the only non-politician on the panel, Blaise Lovell. What do you think, in covering this legislature, was the most impactful thing that was done this year?
I think what's going to have the most wide-ranging impact is these funding measures that the legislature passed, specifically this $1 billion that they set aside for housing initiatives. There's the $600 million that's going to go to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands to hopefully build some homes or acquire land or provide mortgage or rental assistance for some of the waitlisters on the DHHL wait list. There's also $300 million set aside for more affordable housing. But really, even though there's all this money, what it's really going to come down to is how these agencies, are able to implement these programs and spend these funds, hopefully in the next couple of years. The other thing besides housing, I'd say would have a very large impact on the state, I think, is going to be that Mauna Kea Bill that takes management away from the university and transfers it to a new authority. How that plays out is also something we're going to have to watch for in the next couple of years.
Let me ask, though, Blaise, do you think that to a certain extent that Mauna Kea Bill was an effort to actually increase the chances for the TMT, the 30-meter telescope, to get built?
I mean, in the bill, it does say that astronomy is going to now be a policy of the state. It seems that the legislature was intent on keeping astronomy there, if not, being able to grow it. Now, that's largely going to be left up to this authority. They'll be able to decide how many telescopes, if any, stay on Mauna Kea, but they'll need to make, astronomy a policy of the state. The bill requires that. It requires them to have educational programs and programs on top of the mountain, and possibly it paves the way for TMT.
Representative Ward, responding to what Blaise Lovell said from Civil Beat, do you think that the government in its current state is capable of spending that kind of money, $600 million, effectively for Hawaiian homes?
Daryl, first let me say that it's amazing what you can do when you got billions of dollars. Suddenly you get political will. The capacity that has been shown by DHHL would probably put that into question, but remember, it's been 100 years since we've actually funded them adequately. In fact, at the rate we've been doing with 28,000 on the wait list, it's probably another 75 to 85 years before we actually fund them. So they will gear up, whether they do it as stellar as we expect them to do. You remind me, I put a amendment on the floor to have a kind of a watchdog committee to make sure they do exactly what your question is leading to. and my colleague to the right, if I remember, did not vote for that amendment on the floor. But yeah, they're not used to having that money. It's like giving your teenage son, a couple $1,000s and say, spend this wisely. That's not exactly the case. They know what they have to do, but there's been a lethargy because they've never had the money to do it. So I'm confident they're going to spend it well, and there's going to be more Hawaiian housing with those funds.
Go ahead, Della.
I'll respond to Rep. Ward's challenge. I think what we did was we required a transition plan. And so with all of these big bills, I think you hit on a really important topic is how are these agencies going to deliver? So with many of the funding measures we've put forward, we've also tacked on follow-up and oversight. In the instance of DHHL, they have to come back with us and they have to spend that money in 3 years. For the Public Land Trust agreement, the settlement, we put down a down payment on our obligations for the Public Land Trust funds, but we're also requiring a working group to continue to move forward and negotiate what does the rest of that Public Land Trust obligation look like. We can go down the list of the many things that we're working on and making sure that there's going to be follow-up. One thing near and dear to my heart, which didn't get a lot of coverage this session, was the broadband initiative. We're going to get $200 million in federal funds to help build out broadband infrastructure across the state. So we're also asking that a working group be formed between UH and the Digital Equity Office to be able to map things out.
Senator?
And Darrell, I think specifically on Hawaiian Homes as well, I think we gave them additional money for positions that they say they needed in order to do it, to spend that money down. And if you look back at what the Senate required in Senate Draft 2 of the bill, we actually had them list out the projects that they think they could get done by 2028. So already, we've kind of forced them to start the planning for what exactly they're going to spend the money on. So there is already a template, and the oversight for the legislature is going to be seeing how far along are they in actually implementing the various projects. And some of the projects that they noted are ready for construction. Other projects are in the planning stage. Some of the projects that they listed are really to acquire the property that they need to acquire in order to build the units.
Senator,
I think we also.
Senator, let me just follow up kind of what Representative Belatti was saying. They have to spend this money in 3 years, and I'm just wondering, given the regulatory approvals that are required, the environmental studies, all those other things that have always kind of constrained our ability to build homes at a rate that the population needs, did those kind of regulations get bypassed at all in order to get these projects done?
Well, no, not at all. And in fact, that's what we asked them to outline when we were coming up with Senate Draft 2 in the Ways and Means Committee, is give us the projects, and we actually required them to tell us, including the entitlement process. So the projects that they listed that they said was going to be possible by 2028, gave us a little bit of an idea of exactly what they can build. And obviously, if they need to come back in and we can lapse the money and reauthorize it, I think that's something that we certainly want to do. This is just the beginning. I mean, we know that even if they were able to build all the projects that they listed for us, that still just gets a part of the people on the wait list with homes. So I think this is just a start, is really what it is.
Let me just ask Blaise a quick question. Do you think, and I know you've covered Native Hawaiian issues, do you think that this is a new relationship, say, between the Native Hawaiian community and the legislature because many of these things have been waiting and languishing for many years before all of a sudden, the other example is the waitlist lawsuit getting settled for that fairly large amount of money. Do you think this is a big change in terms of the relationship between the Native Hawaiian community and the state government?
I think a lot of people hope that relationship is changing and that it's more there now, that Native Hawaiians are getting more access into the Capitol and being able to push through some of these measures. But this is only just one session, Darrell, right? You've got to wait to see what it's going to be like next year. There's going to be other priorities. Homelessness is still a big priority for the state. Housing, food production, agriculture. we still don't really know yet what hasn't been funded this year with this $2 billion surplus. And even with the DHHL, like Gil said, this is the $600 million. It's going to put a dent in the wait list possibly, but the department has estimated that they need about $6 billion in funding total if they ever want to get through the entire wait list. So there's going to have to be eventually some kind of permanent funding source. I think the governor has been talking about, he floated an idea of putting some tourism dollars towards that, but we'll have to wait and see.
You wanted to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say, another thing that is a kind of a theme of this year is that the legislature has really challenged agencies to be innovative. So, for example, with DHHL, it's not just about building more affordable housing programs, or projects. It's also looking at mortgage payment assistance and down payment assistance. So some of that money is also going to be challenging DHHL to look at different ways in which they can address the housing issue, affordable housing issue for Native Hawaiians. And again, across the board, we are challenging the agencies to do and be more innovative in this time. For example, agriculture. Blaise mentioned, food security has been a long time priority for Governor Ige. Well, we've put a lot of money into food security this year that didn't get covered. Things like funding for a food hub pilot program, which we just saw the city and county of Honolulu add additional $3 million to that project. So there's a lot of things happening, and again, pushing innovation between the Department of Education, public safety, our hospitals, really to get moving on all of these issues that we saw become very important during the pandemic.
Representative Ward?
I think you put your finger on something when you said, is there a difference in the Hawaiian community now given what's going on? If you remember, the Hawaiian Renaissance started in the 70s and the 80s. It was cultural primarily. It started in Hawaii with the pig farmer, George Santos, and then it went on. And now I would submit it's a political renaissance. It's an awakening to economic and social issues because, quite frankly, after a number of years in the legislature, as you know, I would watch every year the pablum that they would put out for the Hawaiian community. If it's cultural, if it's collective, if it's dancing, e como mai Hawaiians. If it was economic or political, well, we're not ready for you. Finally, we've reached that stage. It's an encouragement, and I think there's a lot of Hawaiians who are going to take that and run with it so it just doesn't begin and end with this $600 million. And don't forget the 328 from the Kalama case.
All right.
And the Hawaiians are going to spend that very well because they each get about 120,000.
Senator, you wanted to say something again?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there was still a little bit more prompting, obviously, besides us requiring them to give us a list of projects they think they could do. We also prompted them to actually look at doing a rental project on Hawaiian Homelands. Mm-hmm. And that money, the $41 million, is in the budget so that they can actually produce rentals for their beneficiaries. So I think, again, we're sort of pushing the departments as Representative Belatti mentions. For example, the Hawaii Public Housing Authority has always just basically built HUD income types of projects. Basically, that's what they were used to building. We actually are authorizing to build a mixed use type of project, meaning they can build not just affordable housing, workforce housing projects that fit under HUD's guidelines, but also do something for the gap group. And that's something new. And I think that's one of the things that we hope that they'll pursue and looking, and maybe they might start at Mayor Wright, at the redevelopment of Mayor Wright, and have units that not just serve those that fit under the guidelines, but also will be able to provide affordable rentals for the gap group.
Blaise, Lovell, what other issues do you think that we should be talking about?
I mean, there's just so many, as you know, that happened in the legislature.
But it jumps out to you, it was surprising to you that it got accomplished or didn't get accomplished?
You know, there's quite a few bills that dealt with programs for women in prison, some reentry programs, other programs within jails and correctional facilities. But I mean, still, I think it's kind of hard to wrap your head around this $2 billion surplus that we had and how all that was spent. I think that's why so much of the focus has been on, all these different funding initiatives that the legislature's.
Let me ask Della Belatti, Representative Ward made an interesting comment. He says it's amazing how when you have $1 billion surplus and all of a sudden you have political will. Is that really what happened this year? I mean, frankly, it looked to me a little bit like that. Like we've always been so hand to mouth, it feels like, for so long. And then once there's this pile of money, boom, now we can do these things.
So I will disagree a little bit with the characterization because, for me, the experience of the last 2 years and the roller coaster of being in the pandemic, and this time last year, we were looking at deficits and we were looking at how do we shore up the budget. We didn't know we were going to be having this economic revenue, raining down on us. And so I really think the political will is there. Money really helps. I think when you look at what we funded, one of the things that I'm proud of this legislature is that we tried to fund those things that we knew there was where we can make sure there's going to be follow through. So for example, Blaze is talking about some of the women's pilot programs and the community furlough programs. We have long known that maybe that is an area that we can tackle. So that makes a lot of sense to invest monies there. Another thing we funded, things like adult dental, which I know is something near and dear to your heart, Daryl. We've long known that we had to do this. And so by putting our money there, we are committing to that. And it is, yes, it's an act of political will, but it's something that is going to have long-term investment and impact. So I don't think it was just a spending spree, as some people said, and that we were just willy-nilly doing things. We really looked at what are the programs that are going to have the most impact. Where are the places also where we could do one-time investments that would have also that impact, and then we funded. Now the follow-up is going to have to be, as Senator Agaron said, it's legislative oversight moving forward.
It's interesting that what you're saying is that many of these things are things that have been asked for and discussed for many years. It's not like, oh, here's money, let's do this, this new idea. These are old ideas that are finally getting funded, right?
No, but Daryl, I think what people forget is just 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, remember there was a package that both the House and the Senate and the governor proposed. Some of those items kind of fell off the table once the pandemic started and we started going into these sporadic types of sessions. But some of those items passed. We still worked on them. We invested in infrastructure to help with affordable housing. We put more money into DERF and the other funds, and we kept looking at whether or not we could do the EITC as make it permanent, make it refundable. And this year, in some ways, yes, with money helps, but it's not things that we haven't been working on and looking at doing.
I want to jump in here real quick.
Wait, stop. I have to honor our viewers here. Okay. The questions are starting to pile up, and I know you guys respect that, so I'm going to be rude. Sorry about that. Where did the budget surplus come from? This is Francis in Honolulu. That's kind of a good, fair question. Representative Ward, where did all this money come from?
That's a great question, because my focus this session, as it's been in previous sessions, are the Hawaiian issues, but also the economic issues. 60% of Hawaii's people are under ALICE, as you know, those that have been, the asset
basically
income challenge.
Low-income people, yeah.
Almost 70%, 65% of our people are poor. The difficulty with what we've done, which was good, we never did any structural change or economic diversification. And that's where I'm saying, the money comes, the money goes, but in terms of all the people out there looking at gas prices at almost $5, $6, looking at food prices, people in Hawaii are hurting, and we haven't done anything to help the economy. And one of the things I really have hope for, but I really feel disappointed, is that we have the COVID test system right here with Patrick Sullivan, Oceanit, the spit in a cup, which is now a thing in the nose. We can start our own pharmaceutical industry, which we haven't started, even though there's money low-key in a budget item that is going to go out to bid. The point is, we have got to get the pie to grow rather than keep slicing it up. And today we had a sort of a boon in the thing, we give it to the Hawaiians, but we haven't really helped. The size of the economy doesn't fit the needs of Hawaii's people. That's the bottom line.
So to answer that question, Daryl, I think, where did the money come from? I think we cannot understate enough how much the effect of federal dollars had in our economy. Unlike the last recession, where we saw the tourism monies fall off, we didn't have that kind of investment that we saw the federal government do. Things like unemployment, shoring up people. And so we cannot say enough about that. And then now that the economy is picking back up, revenues are just coming in. We are seeing record numbers of tourists returning, and we haven't even opened up our international market yet. So revenues are good on all levels. Is that right? Is that correct, Senator?
Blaze wanted to say something first.
Well, I was going to say, bottom line, it's just tax collections are up. It sounds almost counterintuitive that we just went through this pandemic where everyone's worried about money, yet the state's raking in, record amounts of revenue. But I mean, that's kind of the story in a lot of places where, a lot of people who were rich got richer and those economic disparities grew. But to answer the question, the $2 billion came from a surprising amount of tax collections that came in over the last year.
Senator Agaron, it strikes me that, whereas there was some tax relief provided to lower income people, there's the rebate and there's the earned income tax credit or so on. Did you do anything for the excise tax, for example, or for the income tax, which are both regressive? Mostly the excise tax is a very regressive tax. We tax in this state. We tax prescription drugs. We tax groceries. We tax rent. With all this money, why wasn't there an effort to attack some of those regressive taxes?
That's one of the challenges that we faced in coming up with a budget, is that with the federal money that came in to shore up our economy, came a lot of conditions, and one of the conditions that was difficult for us to deal with is the fact that if we were to do any kind of tax cuts, including the rebates that we did for the $100 and the $300, we would have had to raise taxes if we actually did that in a way that spent more than $250 million. So we were kind of hamstrung by the fact that the federal government had these rules. The other big rule that the federal government placed on us for the use of the money, of course, was that we needed to maintain effort in terms of the budgets at the Department of Education and the University of Hawaii, meaning 25 to 26% of the general fund budget had to go to the Department of Education, and we had to maintain 6% of general fund budget for the University of Hawaii. So anytime that we were looking at making changes in some of the other departments, that's about 31% of whatever we did also had to go into the Department of Education. So yeah, I think we're prime if, assuming now that the Council on Revenues gives us another update that says that revenues will be even higher coming up next year, I think we're primed to consider making some tax changes. I think we should be getting a report from the new Tax Review Commission, and I think we'll probably take very seriously any kind of recommendations they have for reducing some of the burdens on our taxpayers. Because next year, the federal obligation is done. We don't have to do the maintenance of effort. We can go ahead and look at reducing taxes, and we're no longer bound by the limits that they've placed on us.
Representative Ward, did you hear that?
I was going to say, Gil, I heard you say we're going to reduce taxes because we are the highest taxed in the nation, highest cost of living in the nation. And I'm glad that we're in public television because, as you said, Daryl, we've heard it here publicly. Let's keep the Democrats to their word to lower taxes, particularly the GT taxes for medicine and for basic stuff, feminine hygiene, et cetera. We can't even get those kind of bills through. Yet at the same time, we've got a big surplus because we got the highest taxes. I mean, duh, not rocket science.
Blake, you covered it enough to realize that they love the excise tax at the state legislature.
Yes, and I've covered it long enough to know that they're probably not going to reduce it too much. But there were a couple bills to at least to make more exemptions. We've already got a lot of exemptions for certain special interests, for shipping, for housing development. one of the bills would have exempted things like food or medicine or feminine hygiene products from that, the things that, really put a lot of burden on the lower income folks. But an overall decrease in the general excise tax rate, I don't see that on the horizon.
Can I mention that, we were also very concerned about small businesses. And so we did lower, and I'm going to make sure I get this right. I'm looking at Senator Agaron. We lowered the rating so that they would not have to jump up into the higher bracket for unemployment taxes.
Yeah.
And so that is actually a really big deal for our small businesses that are struggling. With the obligations now of the higher minimum wage that we're putting on, and I personally really support the retirement savings program that we passed and are going to hopefully implement as an opt-in program. There is a sense that small businesses weren't getting the relief that they needed, and they're still struggling. We still have to remember that they're still struggling, and now they're struggling with labor shortages. And so we did offer some small business tax relief.
Describe that retirement program, how that's supposed to work.
Or
unless you want to have Senator.
I don't want to hog the coverage, but it's a program that's going to be an opt-in for private businesses that don't offer retirement plans, and it'll be for all workers. And instead of a opt-out program that has been adopted in many other states, Hawaii has taken what was the idea from AARP. They were very great advocates, but what we're doing is we're going to be providing I believe a $500 incentive for people to opt into the program. And so we really want to see how that's going to have an effect on kind of building the numbers. What the experience in other states is that they struggle.
But let me just understand. So this is a program where if I'm a small business person and I have an employee, I can divert some portion of their payroll into a retirement plan for them.
Yes.
Okay.
And then it's an opt-in program, and then there will be a matching state incentive. And you know what, this is really, I love this legislation because it was really being advocated for by AARP, but it's about helping all workers and especially younger workers and getting them to start saving earlier.
Another question from a viewer. We can move off of money and move to some more of the social issues and crime and punishment and so on. It says, Mike from Makiki wants to ask, for Blaze, what's your opinion on the bail reform issue? Well, we'll get everybody's opinion, but that was an interesting story because it was kind of off the radar for a long time, but then after the legislative session was over and we had a little spike in crime, all of a sudden everybody was pointing at this bail reform issue as a bad idea. What do you think is at play there?
Well, bail wasn't off Civil Beat's radar. We've been covering it for a while. But I mean, this isn't a new, cash bail reform at the legislature. It's not really a new idea. I think in 2018, Judge Ron Trader's group is the one that originally proposed it after doing this kind of working group to look at what kind of pretrial reforms the legislature should make. It died the last couple of years, but finally passed this year. It didn't really, and I covered it in conference committee at the end. My takeaway was that it didn't really satisfy either the criminal justice advocates or the law enforcement groups and prosecutors. No one really got everything that they wanted. The criminal justice advocates wanted less restrictions. Law enforcement either wanted more or didn't want it at all. But the bill still has quite a few exemptions. I mean, there's at least 14 or 16 if the offense involves assault, terroristic threatening, sex assault, abuse of a family or household member, or any number of other violent offenses. It wouldn't be covered under this cash bail bill. And also, there's a catch-all somewhere in the bill, I believe, that says that if a judge decides that someone could be a danger to the public, or they run the risk of recidivizing, so they'll go to jail but then come back out and commit another crime and then go back to jail, they can still impose bail. So I'm no lawyer, but it seems to give judges some discretion.
Senator Agaron, on that bill, what we're hearing from law enforcement is that just saying someone is a nonviolent offender really often understates the risk to the community, that people who are willing to break the law, especially repeatedly, even if it's minor crimes, are a danger, and that eventually they will escalate, and then you see them, fatally conking a security guard over the head or something like that. What do you think of law enforcement's response to this bill now that it's out and it's being debated in the community?
Well, I think the key to this entire issue is really reading the bill and reading the actual language. I think Blaze talked about a little bit of the different exclusions. And so basically this really just applies in large part to first-time offenders and for non-violent crimes. And again, as he mentioned, if for some reason the prosecutors believe that bail should still be set and there's some sort of risk to the community and some sort of risk of recidivism, which is also in the bill fairly broadly, that they can go ahead and ask for the judge to require bail. So what this really does is, and if you take a look at the testimony from the judiciary itself, they basically said that one of the things that they were looking for in the legislation is whether it maintains and fits four goals. One, does it maintain a presumption of innocence, which is the hallmark of our entire criminal justice system? Does it ensure appearance of the defendant? Does it minimize the risk of danger to the community? And does it ensure equal treatment of people regardless of race, wealth, or social class? I think one of the criticisms of bail has always, of cash bail, has always been that it criminalizes poverty. I mean, people who can't afford end up being held in custody, and in the past, sometimes for longer than what their sentence would have been if they were actually convicted. One of the key things for me when looking at the testimony was that the judiciary said that proposed legislation accomplished these goals. So for some of the critics who say that this was taking away the discretion of the judges, at least the judiciary in testifying, basically said that this legislation fit the goals of the criminal justice system.
Let me ask Della Belatti, though, if this bill is going to be so narrowly focused that it's not going to let hundreds and hundreds of people avoid jail, why did you then not fund the new jail? There seemed to be a connection that, we're doing bail reform, so maybe we don't need a jail. Is there a connection between that bill and the fact that you don't feel that we need a new jail?
I think there's a connection in the sense that we know that the jails are a place where people are cycling, right? For some, the homelessness types of crimes that people are being brought in for. And so we need to figure out, one, it's not just about building new prisons, it's about funding programs and making sure people get into those programs. So last year, actually, we passed a bill that was a pilot program for the courts to deal with these, nonviolent misdemeanors, petty misdemeanors that may have mental health issues, and how do we get them and move them into the mental health system versus the jail system. And so that's how those two things are connected.
So essentially what you're saying is you have actually passed things that will keep people out of jail because they're going to get help they need instead of just bail or not.
Yes, and we want, we know that some of the challenges out there on the street are mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and then we also know that these are the nonviolent offenders are getting brought in for, urination or for loitering or trespassing, and those are really, important things that we need to address and get them the help that they need if they're in that type of situation.
Representative Ward, your feelings on that?
Yeah, the difficulty is that 80% of the people in prison have some mental health difficulty. 80% of the people in the mental health institutions have some kind of a misdemeanor or a felony charge. So the point is we're basically warehousing these people, and this bill, which I call the Get Out of Jail Free Bill, is to do what you exactly said. We got to free up the prison. The overcrowding is not fair. We've got to be able to cut it down, and that's letting these people out. Case in point of why this is bad, not only because of what's going on in the mainland, and recidivism is left, right, front, and center with the smash and grab, and people are going with impunity. But it's here where the Kapolei courthouse is the case in point. They just let a person out who then went out and bludgeoned a homeless woman.
The police station.
Right at the police station, at the Kapolei police station, not the courthouse.
Let me ask, though, Representative Ward, do you kind of agree that we don't really need a big jail? We do need to address our mental health issues?
We need those programs. But we had the money, but we didn't put the money into the programs. I mean, the drug treatment programs are so needed that we are lacking all that. In fact, the other difficulty is we don't give them skills, even IDs. We have to pass a bill for the public safety system to provide IDs for the prisoners to get out. The point is, It's like 75% recidivism in our public safety system. If you went to the doctor and 75% of the time you never got healed, would you keep going to the doctor? That's the way our prison system is working.
I need to move on because I'm
Let's
getting
move
more
on.
questions. Okay. Not one bill passed concerning fireworks. What happened? It's an issue that really bothers our community.
Can I address
from
that?
Maryland. Sure.
There was a bill that says we will authorize the counties to pay you to tell on your neighbors that they have illegal fireworks. In other words, we're going to have a spy network. We're going to have the counties pay people to turn in their neighbors because of fireworks. I mean, that's really the extreme. It didn't pass, but it's the thinking of how desperate it is for some people to think that fireworks are so bad.
Blaze Lovell, on the fireworks issue, there was at some point a declaration, as I recall, that we are actually going to do something about fireworks this year. Usually that's in January, right after New Year's, and then by March, everyone seems to have forgotten. But I'm wondering, what was your take on what happened with fireworks and why they struggle so much with actually doing anything about the illegal fireworks in this state?
So I love my really old studies, Daryl. So about a decade or more than a decade ago, the legislature actually commissioned a study on this. I think a follow-up was called Blast from the Past, and it basically made all these recommendations on what you should do if you want to tamp down on fireworks use. You want to allow inspections at the docks. You want to give more resources to law enforcement. You want to, actually, I don't think it recommended raising fines, but there is a plan. It exists, and it lays out a roadmap for what lawmakers could do if they want to. But every year this comes up, and we write about it. We talk to the people who push for those reforms. It just seems that there isn't the political will within the legislature, and I think that's reflective of the broader community. I mean, you go out on New Year's Eve, you just see how many arrows there are out there. It fills up the night sky, it makes it like daylight. So if there isn't the political will in the community, I really doubt there's going to be the political will in the legislature to move anything.
Just to
Senator
correct
go ahead.
one misinformation, there was a bill that was passed increasing the fine from $2,000 to $5,000. Now, is there more that needs to be done with fireworks? Certainly. But, this is the kind of thing that we have to keep coming back to because, as Blaze said, we need to look and figure out the ways in which we can address this. And this means, yes, looking at what's happening at the docks and seeing where it's coming in.
Not easy to change culture. It's too ingrained within our communities to just say, flip, we're going to turn it off. It's not going to be that easy, but it has to be studied.
Senator Agaron, there's a direct question to you, but I'd like to broaden it out a little bit. It's someone named Chadwick on Facebook says, as Maui Senator, why haven't you pushed to fund Honopiʻilani Highway, which is being affected due to sea level rise? There are many other roads affected by the sea level rise on other islands as well. What was the action or actions taken on sea level rise at this legislature? I know there was some funding to move roads and so on. We had a house fall into the ocean recently, and the Department of Land says, well, that's what they have to do. What happened to the legislature this year about that?
Well, it's not. I guess the questioner maybe hasn't followed everything that was done this year, and there was funding in the budget to actually move some of the roads, state roads that are on the shoreline, and there was legislation that actually requires Department of Transportation to take sea level rise into consideration when they plan new roads and when they replace roads. So that's something that we've never required DOT to do, and now they will going forward. That's one of the things they will have to do. I think a lot of the funding that we provided to DOT for the North Shore and Oahu was aimed at shoring up the roadways and also moving them out. I think recently during the big rainstorm, we know that on Maui, parts of Kaupo were completely cut off when parts of their pavement just fell into the ocean. And so we know that that's something that needs to be done.
Let me ask, though, there was a bill, Blaze, maybe you remember this, there was a lot of discussion about the sand burritos, and there was a bill that would have cracked down on those, I believe, that got watered down to a study. Is this another issue of political will, where they're not really willing to stand up to homeowners and say, you bought a house too close to the ocean and it's your loss?
It's possible. I think the bill you were thinking of it would require them to identify their sand burrito, and we were joking that you'd have to name your sand burrito. But there are a few other bills.
That bill actually passed.
Yes.
That bill did pass. So it's something. It's sitting on the governor's desk.
House Bill
Oh, it did pass.
2006.
What
did
would it
pass.
do? What would it do? Either of you guys?
It requires for an emergency permit to install sandbags that the BLNR include as a condition of emergency permit, a requirement for the attachment of identifying information, including the permittee's contact information and permit number to the sandbag. So it is taking some steps forward in ensuring emergency permits for this.
And what happens if, so does that force DLNR to actually make a decision? Because I think that's been sort of the issue, that they have not been making these decisions. They've said, I mean, I think they moved to fine one guy recently, but they had, a lot of those things had expired permits already. They know they're expired, but they're just allowed to lay there.
So I don't know that this tackles that particular problem specifically, but look, we know that this is going to be an issue. It's hitting all of our shorelines. It's going to be a difficult issue to tackle, and this notion that we can just bail out coastal properties, that's not really the solution. We've got to attack this more systematically. I know that we've tried with legislation to do pilot projects in various parts of the state, Alawai being one of them, but this is something that we're going to just have to continue to focus on. We don't know what the correct solution is, and the financial fix for this would quickly eat up any kinds of revenues that we have.
You know, this is an interesting question, and I remember the discussion about this, and it's got such a bizarre title, the Extended Producer Responsibility Bill. And I know that there was a lot of discussion about it, but this questioner wants to know why the bill did not move. EPR bills throughout the world are the logical next step in addressing packaging waste. And so I guess, Senator or Representative, can one of you explain what that's about and why, what was it supposed to address? And broadly, what was done to address waste stream recycling and those sorts of issues this year?
I think there were actually two bills, right? Two bills that did pass. One was to sort of change the way we deal with electronic waste, to add a number of other items to what needs to be recycled, right? And then the other one was to look at packaging of certain things that was going to ban certain substances that are used in packaging. The other bill, I'm not sure. When things go to conference, I mean, there's issues, and I don't think they ever. I can't remember if that bill even came to a meeting at conference. I believe that conferees may have been appointed, but I don't recall a meeting being held in that bill.
Let me tackle that. Let me tackle that. So that is I would say, a fairly new issue at the legislature. Look, solid waste, how we deal with it, we have to get better about how we recycle things. But I think that idea needs a little bit more thought put behind it.
What was the idea? I don't even understand what from the title. I mean.
Well, I think it's the notion that there's so much packaging and we need to reduce waste and packaging. But look at how we've done and handled this with plastic bans and plastic bag bans, and we see how small businesses are even challenged with that and still struggling with those kinds of regulations. So I think again, this is kind of a newer issue about how do we reduce packaging waste.
It does bring up a larger issue, Blaise. Just the environment in general. What did you see that might have passed or didn't pass that would address environmental issues?
I think one that clean energy advocates have been calling for a while is this rebate program for electric vehicle charging stations. Hawaii has a lot more people trying to buy EVs, but the problem is there isn't always the charging infrastructure that's readily available for you to charge your car. If you're able to afford the car, but you can't afford a Tesla charging station to put in your home, or if you don't have a home and you rent and your building doesn't have one, the only place you can go and charge that's publicly available would be like when you go out to shop or at your workplace. So the rebate program would kind of incentivize developers, building owners, landowners to put in those charging stations to help people out.
On the larger picture, though, like solar energy, for example, do we have, Senator Agaron, are there things to encourage solar energy? I I seem to recall that there have been issues where it's so difficult to get a big industrial-sized solar farm out there. There was some discussion about whether that needed to be streamlined, or there was a lot of conversation about whether solar farms are appropriate, say, on some kinds of properties. Did you make progress in terms of meeting our alternate energy goals this year?
I think one of the challenges that the solar industry is having right now is really a supply chain issue. Because we know that Hawaiian Electric did put out an RFP on a lot of the islands, especially on my island, to actually get new, power purchase agreements set up and have these new developers come in. And I know that some of them are having some difficulty in actually getting their projects to go forward, even after they've gotten their entitlements, mainly because there's a shortage of getting materials, and a lot of the materials are produced in China. And I think going forward, that may be a continuing challenge. And that's one of the reasons I think that we've got some bills that passed to take a look at, can we do something about creating, getting hydrogen? And I think there's a money that was put into studying that. I think the Natural Energy Lab is going to do that. And I believe that there may be some other bills that were out there that also took a look at how are we going to meet the portfolio standards by the deadline that we've set.
Representative Belatti, energy and the environment, what were the highlights, do you think?
There were a number of important bills addressing the cesspool problem. We are, trying to shut down cesspools and make sure everyone transfers over to better systems. And so there was some work done there that's really important. Also, there was quite a bit of funding in Department of Land and Natural Resources for invasive species, addressing axis deer on the neighbor islands, rapid ohia death. So there's a lot of watershed protection measures, I think, that we funded. And so a lot also was done for the environment. I will also say that, how we manage tourism continues to also be a key priority. I think as we see more tourists come back and we're going to see pressures placed upon both our natural resources and our residential communities, we also, continue to put money and effort towards the reservation system for our state parks and natural resources.
Representative Ward, were there things that jumped out at you in the areas of energy and environment?
On the environment, as you know, my district has Hanauma Bay. Hanauma Bay is coming back alive because COVID basically shut it down. But it was the various research that indicated there are certain chemicals within the sunscreen that basically kills the coral. And that was a bill that we passed a couple of years ago, but the one this year was to say any chemical that's not FDA approved should not be in sunscreen. Unfortunately, that didn't go through, but it's where I think the coral's coming back to life, and they've even got methods now where they can transplant and repopulate, if you will, coral reefs.
Senator Agaron, that reminds me kind of what Representative Belatti was talking about. What emerged as the tourism policy out of this legislature?
Well, I think what we wanted to do was, basically, actually provide oversight. I mean, they've said that they've been shifting from just trying to bring in more tourists to actually trying to help do a little bit more management. I mean, they came up with all these plans. And so what we're really looking for is, well, you've got these plans now, so what are you going to do to implement them? And I think that was part of the dispute at the end of conference on which measure was going to fund the budget for the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Eventually, I think their budget was placed into one of the budget bills. And we'll see going forward whether or not there's going to be follow-up. I think the members that were added to the Hawaii Tourism Authority this year went through, a lot of grilling from the Economic Development and Tourism Committee in the Senate during their confirmation to make sure that their thoughts were in alignment with what the legislature would like to see done. And what we'd like to see done is to validate what the community is saying about tourism. I mean, we understand the importance of it, but we also think that we should have a little bit smarter tourism. I think one of the reasons that it's a blessing and a curse to have all these people coming. Because some people actually thought that we had a little bit more time to prepare and to actually implement some of the recommendations in those, management plans that the community had helped put together.
Lovell, do you think, I mean, this has kind of always been my opinion, is that they talk about managing tourism, but in the end, tourism generates so much money that it's very difficult to really do much about it. Did you see anything out of this legislature that actually is going to change the volume of tourists coming in?
I can't really point to anything. There was a bill moving to kind of reorganize the HTA and, refocus their goals on exactly what you're talking about, tourism management. But that bill didn't make it, although the funding did. There were a couple of proposals also to, not necessarily like cap the number of tourists that are visiting, but charge additional fees for accessing certain, activities in the islands, or some sort of a visitor fee. I can't recall if that passed this session, though.
$25 to get in Hanauma Bay. There was a bill that says, well, let's do this widespread. It didn't pass, but Hanauma Bay is kind of leading the way. That's for visitors, $25, not for local people.
You know what? Let me plug one bill. Senate Bill 3330 is looking at Pupukea Marine Life Conservation District, and it's a carrying capacity pilot program. So there you go. There's that intersection between tourism management and natural resources. And so we are, there's threads of this tourism management theme. We saw DLNR right towards the end of session saying that they're going to be capping the number of people on Diamond Head, right? And really instituting the reservation system program there. So many of these initiatives that the legislature has already started to talk about are beginning to be implemented. And now it's about follow through and oversight. And it's not just HTA's responsibilities. It is DLNR stepping up. It is places like on Kauai where they have the nonprofits stepping up to help manage areas. It's going to be a community-wide effort to manage tourism as it comes back.
And some of these things that Della just mentioned actually did start on the neighbor islands. Ha'ena did start to have the reservation and parking system and limitations. They did the same thing in Wainapanapa and Maui. And I think Diamond Head is just the next step in what DLNR is doing. And DLNR actually estimates that, this reservation system is going to generate quite a large amount of funds that they can put back into the state parks and the resources that they need. So it's a small part of the tourism management plan, but it's there, and at least DLNR is taking some steps to implement it.
Representative Belatti, you mentioned the broadband bill. I do have a specific question. Mark from Puna, and I think this is of interest in many of the rural areas. Will the broadband bill help those of us who live in areas that cable companies don't serve? How will this change anything? Will it be affordable? At the same time, you've got the federal government trying to reduce the cost of broadband. What does our broadband do? Does it actually deliver the service out where it's not available now?
Those are precisely those kinds of communities that we're worried about. And that's why I think we need to carefully put together the authority or whatever agency is going to help to make sure that we implement, build, and use these federal funds and other funds wisely. It's about how we're going to manage the assets, who owns the assets, if they're bought and paid for and built with federal monies, and how do we ensure that the communities that need the service are getting the service, right? We know that there are many communities on the neighbor islands, but we also know that there are pockets even on Oahu, and that became very, very clear during the pandemic. And how we get the middle mile, the Trans-Pacific Mile, and that last mile is going to take a lot of work. Hence, we're not going to see it. It's going to be a project where we have to build out broadband. It's not going to be something that happens in 1 year or 2 years. It's going to be a 5-year project, but we need to do it because this is the kind of critical infrastructure that only government will do.
I promised you guys I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to go back on my word because I only have about a minute. I give each of you 15 seconds. Give the legislature a grade. Start with Blaze.
B minus.
B minus. Gilbert, Keith-Agaran from Maui.
I think to quote our Senate president, everything that he talked about at the beginning was done. So I'll give us an A.
A plus on the Hawaiian issues, a B on the Ōhaʻi issues, a C on economic diversification.
So what does that come out to, a B?
Yeah, kind of a mediocre B, yeah. We can always do better.
Sounds like my grade point average, actually.
I'm going to be a maverick and use the system that the public school system use, and I will say that we exceeded.
No pass?
No, it exceeds, meets expectations. I think we exceeded expectations, but as I stated in my final remarks as majority leader, democracy is a work in progress. Every single one of these bills, we have to come back and make sure government is delivering on it. And so that's, I think, what is great about government is that we can invest the monies and then we can come back and make sure that we deliver them.
And when you got the money, you can do virtual signaling as much as you want.
Yes, and of course, we now have a massive election coming up with virtually everyone up for re-election, so the public can deliver their own grades. So mahalo to all of you for joining us tonight, and we thank our guests, Representative Della Belatti, House Majority Leader, Representative Gene Ward, Minority Policy Leader, Blaise Lovell from Honolulu Civil Beat, and joining us via Zoom from Maui, Senator Gilbert Keith-Agaran. Join us next week for a very special 90-minute edition of Insights on PBS Hawaii, where we will talk with the finalists for the job of Honolulu Police Chief. Please join in the discussion as we ask the police chief candidates your questions. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.